So starting us off like we always do with number 10.
By Judge Rebecca Dallett, who gave him life without parole, sparking the outburst.
So that was 19-year-old Sandell Jackson, who appeared in front of a Milwaukee County Circuit judge who was sentencing him. Sandell was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and attempted robbery in the shooting death of a 21-year-old. Sandell pleaded guilty to the felony murder charges. He was given a life sentence, but was hoping for a chance at parole at some point of his sentencing, but the judge denied it, and that's when Sandell started to freak out. And everyone else in the courtroom was freaking out as well. Next up, we have a teenager who admitted to murder while he throws up in a courtroom in at number 9.
Mosley became ill in court today after he pled guilty to aggravated murder and other charges. Prosecutors believe the reaction was a genuine sign of remorse.
So that was remorseful Timothy Mosley. Remorseful or not, he murdered 18-year-old Justin Michael Back in Waynesville, Warren County, Ohio. Justin Back was murdered at his family's home. Mosley took a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. So all Mosley had to do was give the court all the information they want of exactly what happened and what was his involvement in this murder. There was another teenager involved as well. He was identified as Austin Meyer. Austin was given the death sentence and he became the youngest inmate on death row in Ohio at the time. Meyer was sentenced to death at the age of 19 years old back in 2014. He is still currently on death row and his new execution date is in 2022. That is just absolutely insane. Do you guys think that teenagers should be allowed to be given the death penalty? Let me know in the comment section below. Alright, number 8.
In the direction of the deceased torso and lower extremities with that 2 times.
So that was a gangman who murdered 15-year-old Alessandro Guzman Feliz. The gunman was a part of the Dominican gang in the Bronx. So this death occurred in a mistaken identity, so the wrong person was killed according to all the testimonies. There was 12 suspects in this case. Right now there are 4 suspects in this case, including the guy who we just saw incarcerated at Rikers Island. They are segregated from other prisoners and they've been receiving heightened security protection at the prison due to receiving death threats from within the prison and even from their own gang members for killing an innocent teenager. So let's just say that being locked up right now might be the safest thing for these teenagers. Next up, number 7, we have a bunch of teenagers freaking out in court.
The end result, more individuals being taken into custody.
There was a group of teenagers who led police in a car chase after stealing a vehicle. These are some pretty serious crimes, but yet in the courtroom these teenagers were not taking the situation seriously. It just looks like they're all trying to impress each other.
At the hearing for 15-year-old Maurice Thomas, the suspected driver, and 15-year-old Thomas Butler, seen here smiling for our cameras, the pair seemed to show up to show out in front of a judge.
I think these kids have to be on drugs or something. And why are they giving gang signs in the courtroom? Next up, number 6, we have another teenager who might have taken a lot of drugs. It looks like this kid is going through withdrawal because he appeared in court shaking like crazy and it looks like he just can't control himself. So this right here is 17-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood from Georgia, and you can see how much this kid is shaking in court. It looks like he can't control it. Hazelwood is accused of killing 2 teenagers behind a grocery store. He is facing a ton of serious criminal offenses. On top of the murder cases, Hazelwood will be facing aggravated assault, theft, and financial fraud charges as well. Hazelwood does not look mentally fit during the investigation and his hearing. There was actually a video of Jeffrey Hazelwood freaking out during an intense investigation where he said, "I didn't shoot them," but then as the video goes on, he says, "A voice in my head said to do it."
Running away the first time, after you shot them, running away.
Didn't shoot them.
Because the bad guy would have gotten you. That's the story that we're going with. The invisible bad guy that looks just like you.
So, contradicting himself a little bit, and he's admitting that he actually did it. I do hope this kid can get some serious help. Moving into number 5.
Of course. Come back again.
That was 18-year-old Penelope Soto, who appeared in court after she was arrested for possession of a prescription drug as Xanax. While in court, she decided to just laugh at the whole thing and cuss at the judge. Well, this turns out to be the wrong move.
It's not a joke, you know. We have not had any kind of drugs in the last 24 hours.
Actually,
Bye-bye.
adios.
Come back, ma'am. Come back.
The judge upped the bail.
Count one will be 10,000.
Are you serious?
I am serious. Adios.
So after all of that happened, the teenager still didn't learn from that. The judge raised her bail to $10,000. He dismissed the teenager, but on her way out, this happens.
Come back again.
And the judge flipped.
What's up?
I believe I heard you saying to...
Yes, I did. I'm not going to the...
I believe you... Did you say me?
Actually, I
Did you say that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Oh, you did say that?
I'm not
I find you in
gonna lie.
direct criminal contempt. 30 days in the county jail.
I can't help but to laugh at this. This is just stupidity, and hopefully this is a lesson learned. Alright, number 4.
Indicate that Miss Me presents a flight risk, or that she would, with the conditions that we've proposed and any others that the court would add,
This video actually went viral because 15-year-old Jennifer Me was crying hysterically, and she was hiccuping as well. And now she is dubbed the Hiccup Girl. Piers Morgan actually interviewed the Hiccup Girl, talking about the crimes that she committed. She was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and this is for a gunshot murder despite not actually pulling the trigger herself. Jennifer Me was just with the wrong crowd of people. Moving into number 3.
When Luis Reyes learned that he'd be in jail for the next 30 years, you knew just by his body language the bailiffs would have to hold him.
That was Luis Reyes Jr., who was just sentenced to 30 years in prison after his very sinful act of sexually assaulting an 89-year-old woman. Is this real life right now? That is just sickening. Well, in court when he found out his sentencing, he started to freak out and he had to be taken out of the court and restrained. The 89-year-old woman was actually there in the courtroom listening to the sentencing. The teen did apologize for what he has done, but the court didn't think Reyes had remorse, hence his sentencing. Number 2.
Brings 17-year-old Jacob Mouzon and 18-year-old Drake Campbell to tears.
That was 17-year-old Jacob Mouzon and 18-year-old Drake Campbell, who broke into tears in court. They were both being charged for murder, attempted murder, burglary, and 2 counts of armed robbery. Both of the teenagers only started crying when the judge denied their bonds due to a lack of emotion they gave during the trial. Both teens showed no remorse. One of the sisters spoke in court, and she apologized for him, and she knows that in their hearts they are breaking. So they're not showing any physical remorse, it's just all the remorse inside. I don't buy it. And finally, number 1, we have this. That actually sounded like a gunshot went off. I was actually really afraid when I watched this video. I was like, what the heck just happened? Well, that was 19-year-old Dexter Johnson from Texas, who had to be restrained from police officers after he decided to lunge towards the victim's family. I mean, haven't you done enough? This came just after he was sentenced to death, so he thought, you know what, there's nothing else to lose, let's just go hurt some more people. Luckily, there was like 30 officers in that room. One of the county court deputies actually tackled, like he launched and tackled Johnson to the ground. And that happened just before he was able to attack the family members. Let's start off at number 10 with the teenager who you saw in the intro. Well, that was KONRAD SCHAFER, who was sentenced to life in prison for a double fatal shooting spree that he went on back in 2013. He was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison, but in 25 years he is entitled to have his sentence reviewed and it could be shortened. Something tells me that we shouldn't shorten this teenager's sentencing.
My family and I had no intention to forgive the guilty because of such a heinous and brutal crime that was done to my grandson.
This teen went on a murdering spree, killing as many people as he could, but for some reason he's asking for leniency. I mean, buddy, did you give leniency to all the people that you gunned down? So he asked for leniency, pleading that he is sorry for what he has done.
I don't know if I was in your position, I feel the same way. I was 15 at the time, I'm really sorry for the things I've done. And I know I did wrong, and I know my apology don't mean nothing to you. And I know it ain't gonna change how you feel about me. But I just feel like I need to apologize, and I really am sorry for what I've done.
Yeah, I'm totally not buying it. The guy looks like he has no emotions whatsoever on his face. I mean, you ain't sorry. Now at number 9, we have a girl who freaked out so bad, she started hiccuping. Like it was just uncontrollably. And I remember one time I hiccuped for like 6 months straight. It was really weird, so.
The parents testified, has a history of being someone who can be manipulated.
So this teenager, Jennifer Mee, was being tried in court for a murder charge, and she just couldn't keep calm. She was freaking out while being handcuffed. Jennifer Mee actually became famous after that video, and after years, she finally talked about that viral video.
What happened to that sweet 15-year-old girl that we first met?
I couldn't even tell you. I got cased up with the wrong crowd of people, really. Unfortunately, when I started experimenting with drugs, I just felt like I was invincible to everything.
Now she will be facing the rest of her life in prison, and she may not have the opportunity to ever leave. During the interview, she said that she thinks she deserves about 20 years, but not more than that.
Personally, I feel would be fair is at least 20 years. I do, because yes, somebody's life was taken, somebody's loved one, somebody's child.
Your attorney has said now there's less than a 1 to 2% chance of you ever getting out of here. How do you hold on to hope?
I can't put nothing past God, but I've been locked up since I was 19. I can't stop fighting. I have a family that wants me home.
Next up, at number 8, we have 17-year-old RACHLIN Martin, who pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and this is after he killed his 63-year-old grandfather with a hatchet. Is this real life right now? He was sentenced to life in prison, and during court, Martin was freaking out. And this guy was just shaking. He was so scared. He was terrified of what was going to happen to him. Well, what else do you think is going to happen to you? Yeah, buddy, you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life. Okay, let's watch that again, but I'll slow it down a bit for you guys. It must be a very difficult case because both of his parents testified against him.
And appeared to be listening intently to testimony, occasionally nervously looking down. Tonight we heard testimony from both parents.
Moving into number 7, we have the youngest on our list, 13-year-old Kashawn Mann, who became the youngest person who committed murder in Kent County. Kashawn killed his mom's boyfriend. So after Kashawn's mom actually tried defending her 13-year-old son, the victim's family were outraged and chaos pursued in the courtroom.
That angered relatives of the victim, Jermel Stokes, leading to a scuffle.
The mom was saying that she actually found out her boyfriend was abusing her son and the murder was justified. I don't think that any murder can be justified, and also the mom was fighting for her son to not be tried as an adult. This is a crazy situation because you have this young kid who is abused, and now because of poor decisions, he's going to prison for the rest of his life.
This is a child. Yes, he may have committed an adult crime.
The judge was about to sentence her son, Kashawn Mann, for second-degree murder.
But obviously, after it all comes out, he was treated in ways that I had no clue of. So we can't say that, oh, he was never mistreated.
Moving into number 6.
Court physically shaking throughout the hearing. Then the sentence was read.
So therefore, it's the sentence of this court, Mr. Rose, that you be sentenced to a minimum of 10 years to a maximum of 15 years in prison.
So that was Stacy Rose Jr., who just couldn't believe his sentencing. Rose Jr. was caught up in a fight when 49-year-old Briscoe came outside to break up the fight. He was a father of one of the teenagers. He's also a father of 5 and a grandfather to 3 grandchildren. Rose Jr. fled the scene on foot through the neighborhood, but eyewitnesses was able to tell the police who the killer was, and he was quickly arrested. Outside of the courthouse, Rose Jr.'s mom was freaking out because she couldn't believe his sentencing.
So my son wasn't a drug dealer. They went over there and stole them pills out of his car.
Rose Jr. was very shocked to know he was sentenced for so long. He claims it was an accident. This teen was just shaking like crazy in the courtroom, and he was just crying right after his sentence. Alright, so at number 5, we have someone who isn't even a teenager yet, and she was freaking out. She appeared on an episode of Beyond Scared Straight. I love that show, and I love how they're such bad kids, they get reformed, and then they turn out to be okay kids. But the episode I'm going to show you guys is about a wannabe 12-year-old girl who thinks she's tough. Her name's Ashanti. And this girl was on track, to serve the rest of her life behind bars because she just seems so violent. Who knows what this little girl is capable of as she gets older.
I'm Ashanti. I'm 12. I like fighting. I threaten people.
and I'm in the squad.
She's kind of speaking too gangster for me. I can barely hear what the heck she is saying, but from what I heard, she's not afraid of nobody. Well, until she was taken to a prison to see what her life was going to be like if she didn't change. Well, what you're about to see is someone who I've never seen be so afraid of anything before. This girl is just freaking out and just losing her mind, and she's like squealing, I think.
We're getting closer and closer. They are gonna love that hair back here, buddy. Here we go. Ain't no time to cry now, sister. Ain't no time to cry.
Okay, what the heck is even happening? She's just in panic mode. I'm not sure how tough this girl really is. Her tough act just seems to be fake. She's not ready for the real prison world. If she was, she wouldn't be acting like that. Number 4, we have teenager Roxana Silvorsky, who was emotionally freaking out in court while she was being sentenced. Silvorsky pleaded guilty to plotting to kill her family. Is this real life right now? Imagine being her family member and you just found out that this teenager, your daughter, your sister, she was plotting on murdering you. Well, luckily she was brought in by the police before anything bad happened, and now she is serving a very long time in a women's correctional facility. Number 3, I actually just wanted to show you guys quickly a different perspective, the opposite of someone freaking out in court, and he seemed to have zero emotions while he was being sentenced. I mean, watch this.
It is hereby ordered that you be committed to the Department of Youth Services until the age of 21, and furthermore committed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction.
This kid was just sentenced to over 40 years in prison, and he didn't even flinch. He was just 14 years old when he stabbed his teacher to death. I mean, I don't know, is he freaking out inside? Number 2.
That's an extreme recklessness, and that's intent, that's maliciousness, that's a definition.
So that was 17-year-old Jacob Morgan from Rock Hill, South Carolina. He found himself in court after he was charged with arson and murder connected with his 14-year-old brother's death. Prosecutors claimed that Morgan maliciously and intentionally started a fire. Morgan was so shocked when he was sentenced.
So therefore I am going to find that there is probable cause to charge the individual with the found over 4 years.
His life just flashed before his eyes. He didn't think that he would get such a long sentence. He was charged for manslaughter, so he received 10 years for that, and another 15 years for arson, which to me it kind of doesn't make sense because, well, let's think about it for a sec. 10 years for killing someone, 15 years for setting a house on fire. I mean, I don't know. Finally, number 1. I count at least 20 officers in that room to retain 19-year-old Dexter Johnson. He was sentenced to death, so yeah, he was pretty pissed off.
The jury has found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
So Johnson sat down and he kind of let it sit in for a few seconds when he was sentenced, and just a few minutes went by when he realized that there's nothing else to lose. This guy just loses his cool and he just freaks out into a rage. I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the woman in front just booked into the floor as if there was like a gunman in the room. She was just super scared. It seemed to come out of nowhere, and luckily there were so many police officers around, because you never know what else Johnson would be capable of doing. I mean, he's already capable of murder. So what's one more murder to his rap sheet? Number 10.
I need to kill Austin. Actually, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him.
That was 17-year-old Dylan Shymaker, who fatally beat his girlfriend's 23-month-old son. I mean, is this real life right now? I watched videos about this kid's case, and his lawyers were trying to justify that Dylan has an anger problem. He didn't mean to kill the 23-month-old baby. He didn't know how to control himself. I'm not sure why there are lawyers defending people like this, you know, defending killers. That little baby didn't have a chance at life. What is his lawyers thinking? What are they fighting for?
But there were other dynamics at work there, including my client's inability to either control his anger or frustration and his inexperience in babysitting.
So this took place in Buffalo in the States, and jurors convicted Dylan of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison, which is the maximum punishment in Buffalo. Alright, number 9. This right here is ALYSSA Bustamante, and she wrote in a diary, and I quote, "I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the oh my god, it's pretty enjoyable. Is this real life right now? Well, hopefully prison is just as enjoyable because you're gonna be calling that place home for a very long time." She's in there after she committed a murder. Bustamante was raised by her grandparents because her mother had a history of drug and alcohol abuse, which led to charges and jail time, and her father was also in jail. He was in jail for assault, so I guess ALYSSA didn't fall too far from the apple tree because she's in prison for life for murdering her 9-year-old neighbor just for the thrill of it. Well, she wrote this: "I just effing killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was kind of amazing." Then she wrote, "I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." Well, hopefully this teen can have all the time that she needs to, think about her behavior in prison. I think we should give her the rest of her life. Like, give her all the time she needs. From there, let's go to number 8. This is 17-year-old AIDAN ZELLMER, who pleaded guilty to murdering a 10-year-old girl who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after 40 years. This came after a plea deal. The 17th Judicial District Attorney Dave Young said this: "In 27 years as a prosecutor, I've never seen a 15-year-old commit such a violent act. This attorney must have seen a lot in his days, especially if he's listening to murder cases all day. And for the attorney to come out with a statement like this is insane. How does a 15-year-old even have it in them to, commit such an awful crime?" At number 7, we have Russell Burrell, who pleaded guilty to a murder. He was alongside 3 other people who committed the murder, and he was sentenced to 6 life sentences in prison plus 10 years. He was the teen we talked about in the intro of this video. Burrell murdered 3 people: Shamika Barris, Michael Martin, and Damian Collin. This was a planned murder in order to steal money and drugs.
Let us be clear, 19-year-old Russell Burrell, who was a juvenile at the time of the murders, was the one who emptied 17 rounds into 3 human beings, and today was his last day in civilized society for the rest of his natural life.
Alright, number 6. We have Shane Thompson, who was 17 years old at the time he committed murder, while he was sentenced to 110 years in prison.
Thompson pleaded guilty to murdering 39-year-old Evelyn Njai during a September 25, 2013 robbery attempt at this Rickers BP located on West 38th Street.
So that wasn't the only crime he committed. He was charged and convicted of murder, robbery, and sexual assault.
Prior to that, Thompson broke into the home of this woman and sexually assaulted her while her husband and sons were held at gunpoint.
This is so sickening. It's hard to even read this. This teenager deserved every moment of that 110 years prison sentence. Thompson is obviously not a normal person. When he was sentenced, he seemed pretty happy about it.
The man he killed, Derek Thomas, has that story.
Why is this guy smiling? Number 5.
17-year-old RACHLIN Martin entered the courtroom handcuffed with his feet in shackles. He sat and appeared to be listening intently to testimony, occasionally nervously looking.
That was 17-year-old RACHLIN Martin, who murdered his grandfather with a hatchet. Martin was 15 years old when he planned the murder of his grandfather. When this kid was in court, he was shaking like crazy.
The defense, however, arguing his client did not have a normal upbringing, functioning as an adult when he should have been treated like a child.
I don't know if you guys saw that, so let's take a look again.
As an adult when he should have been treated like a child.
Why is this teenager scared now? Martin received a life sentence, and he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. He has a chance of setting the record for being the longest serving inmate in prison because he committed an awful crime at such a young age. And he's not getting out until he passes away in prison. So let's see if he can set the record. Number 4, we actually have someone else who killed an elderly person. This right here is 17-year-old teen who murdered 98-year-old Margaret Douglas. She was in her home when the incident happened, and the teenager tried to hide her body in the closet. In court, he tried to apologize for what he did.
I'm so sorry for what I did. I constantly live in regret and shame because of it.
It's been 9 months since these hands committed those acts on...
The only reason why the teen is apologizing is because his lawyers told him to, in an attempt to get a reduced sentencing. But luckily, it never worked. Those fake tears, the words did nothing for him. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3, we have Savon Schmuss, who pleaded guilty to killing his half-sister. Schmuss was only 16 years old at the time when he murdered her in their home. He murdered her and dumped her body near a lake so no one could find out. He tried to get away with the crime.
Photos of her smiling face and memories
A young life taken away at the hands of a half-brother who her family says she loved.
He was convicted and sentenced up to 100 years in prison, so because he took a plea deal, he does have a chance of being released from prison when he's 116 years old. This teen has no sympathy whatsoever, so you know what, why should we? If you can live to 116, then we'll let you out. No problems there. In court, he was asked if he has anything to say, and he just said no. Number 2.
Sharing their thoughts with the teenager who admitted to it all, AIDAN von Grabo.
How do you wish to plead to count 2? Guilty, Your Honor.
Von Grabo taking a guilty plea for first-degree murder and a long list of other crimes, including attempting to murder Michaela's younger sister.
Why is this teen so evil? This took place in northern Colorado, and the teen was given life in prison. The person he murdered was Michaela Grote, who was just 20 years old. And apparently she wasn't the only one on his death list that he created. I mean, what the heck is that? He had intentions of killing many more people. He was only 16 years old when he was charged with first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, attempted first-degree arson, extortion, 2 counts of felony menacing, 3 counts of stalking, third-degree assault of an at-risk person, criminal mischief, and telephone harassment. I mean, that is a mouthful to go through. It's just unbelievable that one person, and I should say not just one person, one teenager was capable of doing. Finally, number 1.
Buffalo teen who killed a man and then set his house on fire to cover up the crime is heading.
Next, we're talking about a 19-year-old kid who spent 20 years to life in prison. He was convicted of murdering 15-year-old Brian Dombick.
19-year-old David Myers may very well spend the rest of his days in a prison cell. He spoke before his sentence, apologizing to his victim's family and his own.
If I could go back and make up for what I did, I would. I'll give arm and a leg.
This might be one teenager who actually felt sorry for what he has done and is willing to deal with the consequences.
I agree. I do deserve to be incarcerated. I committed a crime, and that's all.
So don't get me wrong, I still don't feel bad for him. List in at number 10, we have Brian Lee Draper. Let me take you guys back to the night of September 22nd, 2006, where Brian Draper and his accomplice brutally murdered their classmate Cassie Stoddard for no apparent reason. They were hanging out with Cassie and her boyfriend on the night that Brian and his accomplice said that they were going to the theater to see a movie. As it turns out, they never went to the theater. They were hiding in the house waiting for Cassie's boyfriend to leave so that they can kill her. They turned the electricity off and stabbed the poor girl 30 times. During their trial, the two of them confessed to filming the entire plan. So here's a short clip of the two of them driving away from the scene of the crime.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a joke. I'm shaking. I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie.
How sick and morbid is this? It just seems like they're so proud of what they've just done. Well, they were quickly picked up and interrogated, and they were arrested because their fake alibi fell through, and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Keep in mind that they were only 16 when they decided to brutally murder their friend. John Silva stabs his way. Moving into number 9, we have this girl who freaked out after she was given a life sentence. She was hyperventilating, like So just before the panic attacks were happening, this girl fell to the ground and she started yelling in the courtroom. The woman's family was also freaking out. Alright, number 8.
I gotta wake up every day with that. So, just ask. Actually, I'm just sorry.
I know it's hard to understand what this kid is saying, but he's begging for forgiveness. It's a hard video to watch. I know people make mistakes, but killing someone isn't something that society can forgive, or can they?
John, is there anything you want to say before sentencing?
Well, that was 17-year-old John Freeman, who was saying sorry to the victim's family after he strangled a 5-year-old girl to death. I mean, in that moment, was he really sorry? This also took place near Buffalo, and he was given 25 years to life. And this is for a second-degree murder in which John Freeman pleaded guilty to. So when John turns 42 years old, a judge will determine whether or not John is a danger to himself or to society, and if he's going to be released. Hopefully, if he is released, he's a changed person. There are also many people who have served a number of years to life who just don't get released from prison because they're just always deemed as a danger to society. So although you get like 15 years to life, you can serve like 50 years. Alright, moving into number 7, we have this. You couldn't see the guy I'm talking about during this part of the video, but who you're about to see is 19-year-old Dexter Johnson, who is 19 years old at the time, so he raged out in court when he was given the death sentence. I guess he has nothing else to lose. This is what this guy looks like.
Punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
All rise.
The jurors convicted Dexter Johnson of capital murder. Dexter was involved in a carjacking, robbery, rape, and murder of 23-year-old Maria Paris. Dexter is now 28 years old and he's still on death row. And right now he does not have an execution date. Although someone is given the death penalty, it takes a very long time to go through the whole process. Do you guys believe in the death penalty? Sound off in the comment section. At number 6, we now have teenager Samantha Grigg, who was charged for murdering a Michigan State University student, Dustin Frolka.
Grigg pleaded guilty to unarmed robbery and manslaughter in Frolka's death. The 19-year-old's body was found along I-69 last February. He had been beaten with brass knuckles, robbed.
This case just doesn't seem to make sense to me. 16-year-old Samantha at the time decided to plan a kidnapping to rob and kill Frolka. I mean, she's 16. How do you have these thoughts? She had someone help her as well, and that was 18-year-old Tyrell Bredernitz. So the reason why this doesn't make sense, because it does seem like Samantha had a really bright future. She threw it all away. She was actually a lead singer of her band, and she was actually quite good.
Singer in a band.
Number 5, we have this teenager who, after given his sentencing, turned around and just attacks the people in the first row. I think it was the victim's family.
No, Your Honor. Nothing, thank you.
Yeah, luckily the police was right there to get on top of the situation, to handle the situation before anyone got hurt. All right, number 4.
Can't, they understand the seriousness of the crime.
Barbeau will almost certainly start his prison sentence at the Department of Corrections, Lincoln Hills School for Boys, north of Wausau.
That was 15-year-old Antonio Barbeau at the time of his trial. This one is pretty messed up, but he was given a life sentence for killing his great-grandmother back in 2012. He was just 13 years old. Antonio and his friend killed his great-grandmother with a hatchet and a hammer. The great-grandmother was 78 years old, and this is just so sickening. Antonio won't be eligible for release until he's 50 years old. The article I was reading about this stated that Antonio's lawyers said the punishment was cruel and unusual. I mean, are they freaking kidding me? There's no way that the lawyer actually said this in court. How does that lawyer even sleep at night trying to get this killer out to the public sooner? The reason why Antonio killed his great-grandmother was for money. It's so sickening. I think the punishment wasn't cruel enough, but that's just my opinion. Moving into number 3, we have an 18-year-old who was sentenced to 20 years in state prison for using a dating app to set up a robbery that resulted in a shootout. In the footage I'm about to play for you guys, I really feel bad for this mother who is just so hurt. Once she finds out her daughter was charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison, she totally loses it. She freaks out, and then the teenager starts to freak out as well. This one is really sad. Watch.
20 years in state prison.
The teenager was then quickly taken out of the courtroom by police officers, and the mother was just left there to cry. She was so heartbroken, and I would be as well if I found out that my kid committed a robbery and guns were used and then they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. It's like you lost them. I'm not sure if she is even able to get out of prison sooner, but she did use a deadly weapon during this robbery that could have resulted in someone losing their life. Do you guys think that 20 years was, you know, maybe too harsh of a punishment for this crime? Alright, number 2.
Satan pulled the trigger that killed your son, now masturbates to memory. All of you.
Sentencing Lane to life in prison, Judge David Fury said he lacked remorse and had feigned mental illness.
So this guy might look familiar to you guys, and to be honest with you, I don't care if this guy gets left in prison and forgotten about for the rest of his life. So who you just saw was TJ Lane, the teenager who was in front of a judge for sentencing for a school shooting in Ohio back in 2012. TJ was 17 years old when he shot and killed 3 students and injured another 3. Although TJ was a minor at the time of the attack during the sentencing, he was tried as an adult and he was given 3 life sentences in prison without parole. Well, just a few years after the attack, TJ, he was actually able to escape prison. This was just 8 days before his birthday, and he escaped from Allen Correctional Institution in Ohio along with 2 other inmates. He was able to escape using a makeshift ladder. They used it to scale down a fence during recreation hours. One of the men was quickly recaptured, but TJ and another man who was serving a 12-year sentence for aggravated robbery and burglary and kidnapping remained at large. Police conducted a nationwide search and told nearby residents to lock their doors. Eventually, both men were captured, and TJ was then put into a small cell for 23 hours a day, and he stayed there until he awaited for his transfer to a maximum security prison. A prison where hopefully you can't make a makeshift ladder and escape again. And finally, at number 1, we have this scary freakout from a California teenager who was begging to not go to prison. That was 18-year-old Fernando Elgato, who was accused of rape. He denies all claims, and he was freaking out when he was being sentenced because he was actually afraid of going back to prison. For some reason, he thought that if he fought back, he would somehow be released.
Scared of returning to jail, 18-year-old...
I feel really bad for this kid because if he actually didn't do it, he just appeared in front of a judge, he got sentenced, and now he's going back to prison where I don't really know what happens there. I can only imagine.
Okay, coming into number 10, we have Serena Vela, who is jailed for skipping school. 11th grader Serena loves Harry Potter, Katy Perry, and was sent to jail for cutting school. The Texan teen was struggling and she simply couldn't face it. Now, Serena is from a low-income home and her mother is unemployed. She received fines from her school for truancy totaling $2,700. Because she couldn't pay, she was sent to jail for 10 days. In jail, she was thoroughly searched and locked up amongst adults who committed serious crimes. Now, ironically, Serena had to miss 9 days of school while she was behind bars, which resulted in her being expelled, which is really sad. What kind of system locks up a teenager for skipping school rather than finding out what is causing the problem? This teenager was arrested and faced 20 years in jail for posting lyrics to a rap song.
Onto this list at number 9. He was only 15 years old when he was convicted of first-degree murder after he strangled a 12-year-old boy and dumped his body in a septic tank. He was convicted of first-degree murder, and when he was sentenced to life in prison without parole, he didn't show any emotions. If he was an adult, he could have faced the death penalty because he even admitted to kidnapping his friend, forcing him to go to the woods, and then suffocating him to death. What a brutal crime. Even though he admitted to doing all of that, he never explained why he did it. So yeah, this guy sounds like a serial killer in the making. The police even found a note at the scene of the crime, and on that note it said list to prepare Jerry, and on the note it said strip to underwear, tie hands, hands, gag and cover eyes, and like I said, he's a serial killer in the making, so maybe it's a good thing that he's gonna be behind bars for the rest of his life, because the world's gonna be a much safer place. Number 8 takes us to Joshua Phillips. He was convicted of life in prison without parole back in July of 1999, and that's after he murdered his 8-year-old neighbor when he was just 14 years old. He strangled, bludgeoned, and stabbed Maddie Clifton to death. He stuffed her lifeless body underneath his waterbed, but she wouldn't stay hidden for long. Joshua's mother came into his room days after the murder and found the dead body, which led him to confess to this murder. He said that they were playing basketball outside and he accidentally hit her on the head with his bat. He said he panicked and then killed her because he was scared of what his father would think. And I don't know, it seems like you killed her because you are a psychopath. This was no accident. Here's a clip of Joshua that was filmed 1 decade after the murder.
I'm going like, alright, well, maybe I did deserve to be here. Maybe I deserve to do as much time. Maybe I deserve to die in prison. But I always usually come back with the thought that I can't look at it like that, you know what I mean? And that doing that is just a cop-out and faking it, you know, just saying screw it. And why would I try to learn anything? Why would I try to improve myself? Why would I try to do anything to help anybody if I'm just gonna lay down and just die in here, you know?
Even though he might seem like he has changed, I feel like he is a textbook psychopath who knows the right things to say in order to look like a victim. The youngest American citizen to be sentenced to life in prison make their way onto this list at number 7. I'm talking about the notorious Lionel Tate, who was just 13 years old when he was convicted of first-degree murder.
To be the case, incarceration for your natural life. The now 14-year-old Lionel Tate was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Back on July 28, 1999, Lionel was left alone with a 6-year-old friend in the basement. The two of them were downstairs playing when all of a sudden Lionel came upstairs 45 minutes later to tell his mother that the little girl wasn't breathing. He said that they were wrestling and he had her in a headlock and then smashed her against the table. An autopsy revealed that he had stomped on her so hard that he actually lacerated her liver, fractured her skull and ribs, and her brain was very swollen. During the trial, the prosecution said that these injuries can be compared to falling from a 3-story building. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and the judge said that the acts of Lionel Tate were not the playful acts of a child. The acts of Lionel Tate were cold, callous, and cruel. Moving on to number 6, let's talk about Courvoisier Sims.
A judge sentenced 17-year-old Courvoisier Sims to 70 to 120 years in prison after pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and use of a weapon in their deaths.
Alright, I have to ask, is this real life right now? 70 to 120 years? I know that sounds insane, but I think the sentencing, it kind of fits this crime. He was only 15 years old when he shot 2 teenagers, ages 17 and 18 years old, while he was attempting to buy a gun off of them. It was decided that he'd be tried as an adult because he was involved in armed robberies and 2 homicides. Oh, and he was on probation during the murders for other crimes that he committed in the past. What? So yeah, I think it's safe to say that he is a repeat offender and he will most likely die behind bars because I don't think a parole board will ever grant him probation. At least I'm really hoping they don't. Rodrigo Caballero crawls onto this dark list at number 5. Rodrigo Caballero was sentenced to 110 years in prison when he was 16 years old, and he didn't even kill anyone. So how is this possible? Well, the 16-year-old fired several gunshots at 3 other teenagers, where one of them suffered from a non-fatal but serious injury. He was convicted of 3 counts of attempted murder, and each of those charges, they come with a minimum 15-year to life. And the judge also handed him special enhancements onto his sentencing for firing a gun belonging to a gang and greatly injuring one of the victims. When you add up all of these charges, you get 110 years. So technically, he isn't sentenced to life to prison without parole, parole. He will be eligible for parole when he's 126 years old, but most likely he is going to be dead before he makes it to his parole hearing. Up next, number 4, we have Gregory Brooks. He was 19 years old when he pleaded guilty to abducting and killing the parents of a former talk show host. Gregory Brooks and his accomplices beat them, stole $50, a rifle, jewelry, and other items, then they locked the couple in a closet. Later, one of the accomplices said he would return to the house to finish them off. The judge gave him 60 years for each of the 2 counts of murder and robbery charges, and just moments after he was sentenced to 120 years, his father told reporters that despite his son having a good, supportive upbringing, he was influenced by gang members with negative motives. Could you imagine being sentenced to 120 years in maximum prison at such a young age? Your whole life is just gone. He will literally die and rot behind bars for the rest of his life because of one stupid night. Moving up this list, at number 3, we're talking about Eddie Devine. This case is pretty intense, so prepare yourselves. He was only 13 years old at the time when him and his friend forced a woman into a car where they drove around for hours while they tortured and violated her with an ice pick. Thankfully, the woman was able to escape when the teenager stopped for gas, but she will be scarred for the rest of her life. Eddie Devine pleaded guilty to 2 counts of armed carjacking, 3 counts of armed robbery, 3 counts of kidnapping, and 2 counts of sexual battery. This kid isn't even old enough to go around the block by himself, and he's already committing all of these horrible crimes. To make things even worse, he told police that he was armed with a knife and he threatened to kill the woman before they stole her SUV. I'm pretty sure when I was 13, I was collecting Pokemon cards. I wasn't going around committing all these crimes. Eddie Devine did not get off lightly. He was sentenced to a total of 130 years in prison. Kenneth Young sneaks onto this list at number 2. He was only 14 years old when his mother's drug dealer forced him to get involved in a series of armed robberies. During one heist, Kenneth was caught, convicted, and sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. So basically, he was sentenced to be thrown behind bars without ever having a chance of being released, and he didn't even injure or kill anyone. Let's hear from Kenneth Young.
Kenneth Young. First and foremost, Your Honor, I want to take the time out to say I take full responsibility for my actions and my role in these crimes. I have lived with regret every day as a civilized human being for these crimes. I have been incarcerated for 11 years, and I have taken advantage of every opportunity available for me in prison to better myself.
He was coerced into committing these crimes, and he was at such a young and impressionable age. I don't think he should have gotten this harsh sentence. Because of this young age and the severity of the sentence, he spent most of his time in solitary confinement until he reached 18 years old, where he was then transferred to an adult prison where he will grow old and die. And now at the top of our list, we've talked about him before. We actually did a whole docu-series of him. If you guys want to check that out, you guys can click right over here. It's called The Prison Life of Travion Blount. Well, Travion Blount makes it onto our list at number 1 for this video. Travion Blount was 15 years old when he robbed a party with 2 older gang members. Travion didn't hurt anyone, but he was found guilty of 49 counts, and eventually he was sentenced to 6 life sentences and an additional 118 years in prison. He knew he would be spending a few years in prison. He didn't expect to die in there. This has to be one of the harshest punishments in America for a teenager who didn't even commit homicide. Oh, and his accomplice, well, they only served 10 to 13 years in prison. I don't understand how this was even possible. Out of the 3 of them, Travion was the least involved, but he got the most time. After spending some time in prison, Travion finally got a glimpse of hope.
Received much lighter sentences.
Governor Bob McDonnell reduced Blount's sentence to 40 years, and today, Governor Terry McAuliffe cut it down to 14.
I mean, what the heck? His sentence was reduced from 6 life sentences plus 118 years to just 14 years. This makes me wonder what the heck was wrong with the original judge. I think his license should be put into question because I have no idea what was going through his mind. Maybe he was severely power tripping that day. He was just so pissed off. He's like, I'm giving you life plus life plus life plus life plus life and plus life, and if that's not enough, plus 118 years, just in case. And at number 10, we actually have a teenager who started to freak out after she was denied any possibility of parole. She was really hoping for it. When she was denied, she started to freak out. So what you're about to see is a 19-year-old killer who killed 21-year-old Nathan Potter. victim's family was very afraid, but they are glad that they're being locked away for life. At least they can sleep at night knowing that a killer won't be out there.
On Facebook at number 9. In June 2013, 18-year-old Cameron D'Ambrosio was arrested in Massachusetts for posting a rap verse on his Facebook page. The aspiring rapper referenced the Boston bombings which happened that year, which a lot of people found very distasteful. They wrote lyrics that went, "F a Boston bombing B, wait till you see that shit. I'ma be famous for rapping and beat every murder charge that comes across me." Right. The kid did find fame, but not for rapping, for being thrown in jail for a Facebook post. The teen faced 20 years for making terror threats. Coming in at number 8, we have Genarlow Wilson, who got 10 years for having consensual oral sex with another teenager. In 2005, 17-year-old Genarlow Wilson had consensual oral sex with another teenager at a New Year's Eve party. I guess it happens. The teenage girl was 2 years younger than him at 15 years old. Despite the girl, whose name is protected, repeatedly telling the courts that the act was consensual, Wilson was sentenced to 10 years in jail, which is pretty insane. Legally, as the girl was 15, she couldn't consent. However, provisions could have been taken into account had they had full penetrative sex, but there's no such legislature for oral sex. Luckily for Wilson, he was released after serving 4 years, but honestly, this is insane. Coming in at number 7, we have 20 years for a Daytona teenager. Kay Andrea Cook's sentencing was very dramatic and very sad. This 17-year-old was sentenced to spend the next 2 decades of her life in prison for carjacking and battery. The girl used a dating app to set up a robbery which resulted in her boyfriend shooting a man, who was wounded but didn't die. Kay Andrea was told by her attorney that she wouldn't receive jail time if she pleaded guilty to her part of the involvement in the crime. The video of the girl's sentencing in 2017 went viral as people watched her and her mother break down. Slightly better news for Kay Andrea came in 2018 when a judge amended her super harsh sentence to 11 years. The teen and many others still feel that she was wrongly advised by her defense team in the first place. Coming in at number 6, we have Blake Layman, who got 55 years for breaking and entering. Blake Layman was 16 years old and living in a small town in Indiana when he made a bad decision that would land him in jail for 55 years. The teenager had a clean record and had not been in trouble with the law before. However, his whole life changed one night. Layman and a group of slightly older friends, including 21-year-old Denzel Washington, got high and decided on a whim to break into a home. They noticed that their neighbor Rodney Scott's grey truck was missing. They assumed he was out. Assuming the coast was clear, they broke into his house, and although they were unarmed and for all intent and purpose, actually it turned out very badly. It seems that Scott was not out, he was upstairs sleeping and he was awoken by the trespassers. In classic America style, he came downstairs with a shotgun and shot at Layman and Washington. The older boy died from his injuries. Now, Indiana law protected the shooter, Rodney Scott, from culpability in the murder, and instead the teenage boy was charged with felony murder. All Layman did was foolishly decide to break into a neighbor's home unarmed, but his friend ended up being killed by the neighbor. The blame then fell on Layman, who was, if we remember, also shot. He was sentenced to 55 years in a prison cell. Coming in at number 5, we have the teen jailed for life for killing her child predator. Cyntoia Brown's case is still ongoing and has received a lot of media attention. In 2004, Cyntoia was served a life sentence aged just 16 for murdering a man in Nashville. Cyntoia killed a 43-year-old man who'd paid to have sex with her. The teenager's childhood was marked by abuse. She was raped and forced into prostitution. Last year, pop star Rihanna spoke up for Cyntoia on social media. She shared a text image saying, "Imagine at the age of 16 being sex trafficked by a pimp named Cutthroat. After days of being repeatedly drugged and raped by different men, you were purchased by a 43-year-old child predator who took you to his home to use you for sex. You end up finding enough courage to fight back and shoot and kill him. You were arrested as a result, tried and convicted as an adult, and sentenced to life in prison. This is the story of Cyntoia Brown. She'll be eligible for parole when she's 69 years old." Now, the last I heard, with the support of major celebrities, she is now facing a parole board. Coming into number 4, we have Kenneth Young, who was given 4 sentences for robbery. Kenneth Young received an insane amount of time behind bars for a series of armed robberies he committed in the year 2000. The then 15-year-old had been raised in a low-income neighborhood by a drug-addicted mother. He was told by a 24-year-old crack cocaine dealer, Jacques Bather, that his mother would be killed if he didn't assist him in the robberies. When captured for his involvement in a string of robberies, he was given a shocking and unprecedented 4 life sentences, despite nobody being seriously injured or killed from his actions. In 2011, he went before a judge for resentencing. Instead of releasing the young man who had already served 11 years, his sentence was changed down to 30 years, which I still think is extremely harsh. Coming into number 3, we have Bobby Bostic, who got 241 years for a string of robberies. Like many of the teenagers on this list, Bobby was born in a poor family. Growing up in Missouri, he started smoking and drinking age 10. Age 11, he started stealing cars. In 1995, when he was 16, he robbed do-gooders at gunpoint for money at Christmas time. One of his victims was grazed by a bullet. Now, this obviously is an awful crime, but Bostic received an unprecedented 241 years in jail for his crimes that didn't actually kill anyone. You guessed it, he was denied a plea deal and was met with the full fury of Judge Baker, who said, "You made your choice and you're gonna die with your choice, because Bobby Bostic, you will die in the Department of Corrections." Harsh. 241 years for a teenager who is told that they're gonna die in jail. Honestly, it's insane. Bostic has given a number of interviews about what it was like growing up in prison. Now, the judge involved has even said that she regrets giving him the sentence, saying the amount of time is ridiculous. Coming into number 2, we have Travion Blount, who got 268 years. Blount was handed 6 life sentences for robbery in 2006. At the time, the 15-year-old held up a Norfolk house party with 2 18-year-olds. Nobody was harmed and no shots were fired. The teens did steal marijuana and cell phones, as well as a small amount of cash. The jury convicted the teen for 49 separate felonies, and Blount argued he wasn't guilty of all of them. He was given 6 life sentences plus 118 years, totaling 268 years, which is outrageously harsh considering that nobody was seriously hurt, let alone killed. Blount fought his case, but his co-defendants got just 14 years as they accepted plea deals, which I think is really unfair. In 2014, he was given a partial pardon with his sentence reduced to 40 years. He still has another 29 years to go, while his co-defendants will be out soon. That's what you get for trying to fight your innocence within a system rooted against you. Finally, at number 1, we have the death penalty given to a girl for killing her rapist. What kind of world are we living in, where a man shoots a kid dead and he gets let off for self-defense even when the kid wasn't armed, and across the world, a different teenager is sentenced to death for killing a man who repeatedly raped her? It goes to show that the justice system in the United States is just as broken as it is in Sudan, a third world country. Amnesty International were fighting for 19-year-old Noura Hussein Haman's life after she was handed the death sentence by a Sudanese court. The teenager was married against her will aged 16. She refused to consummate her marriage, so her husband got his 2 brothers and his cousin involved to hold her down while he raped her. The next day, he tried to rape her again, but she escaped to the kitchen. As he cornered her, she grabbed a knife and stabbed him, fatally wounding him. She's been in a women's prison awaiting death since 2017.